Like and subscribe to Pals Fundamentals for more content like this. Sources linked below. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Fundamental Thursday. Today, we've got a really interesting comparison lined up. We're looking at two North Atlantic islands, Iceland and the Faroe Islands, and specifically how they developed these really quite different dominant religious feelings or orientations.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And for this, we're drawing heavily on a paper by Christophe Pons. It's
Yeah.
called The Problem with Islands, Comparing Mysticisms in Iceland and Faroe Islands, published back in 2009
Okay.
in the Nordic Journal of Religion and Society. And Pons is really trying to get at why. Why did Iceland go one way towards modern esotericism and the Faroes another towards Protestant asceticism?
That's the core of it, isn't it? How do you get these two places so close, same roots really, ending up almost polar opposites religiously?
Exactly.
What does that tell us about, cultural forces, maybe long-term societal things? It's like you said, islands can be like a magnifying glass sometimes.
They really can be. To understand the puzzle, maybe we should first just lay out what those different religious worlds looked like.
Good idea. Let's start with Iceland. Around the turn of the 20th century, you see this clear acknowledgement of modern esotericism.
Right, things like spiritualism, theosophy, even Freemasonry gaining ground.
And it wasn't just a flash in the pan, was it? It saw renewals, like in the 60s, and then a big revival from the 80s onward.
Definitely. New Age, post-New Age influences became quite visible.
What's really striking, though, is that even with, over 90% of people officially in the Lutheran State Church, there's this widespread sympathy, this openness to modern esotericism. It's quite embedded.
It really is. Now, contrast that sharply with the Faroe Islands.
Okay.
There, you see this unusually high level of people joining Protestant sects.
Like the Plymouth Brethren.
Exactly. The Plymouth Brethren, they call it Brucisum Como locally, and also the Church Society for the Intermission, the High Mission.
And these became pretty influential.
Hugely influential, especially from the 1940s. We're talking maybe 25% of the population in those groups. Plus, you've got Pentecostals, Charismatics, Evangelicals growing since the 80s, adding another, say, 5% or so.
Wow, that's significant. And similar to Iceland, most are officially Lutheran.
Yeah, about 87% are officially Lutheran on paper, but a big chunk of those are very active members of these sects. It's more about that stricter, disciplined, ascetic approach to faith.
So yeah, the puzzle stands out. Iceland, modern esotericism, mediums, healers, that kind of thing. Faroes, Christian asceticism, strong sects, very different feel. No real mediums or anything like that in the Faroes.
None mentioned, no. And very little of the Faroe-style asceticism in Iceland. So how did this happen? We need to look back a bit.
At their shared history.
Exactly. Both settled by Norsemen, 8th, 9th centuries. Both became Christian around 1000 AD. Both pretty isolated for a long time.
Right, so they started from a similar place, spiritually speaking, Lutheranism plus older folk beliefs.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But then they sort of picked up on different strands of the Scandinavian Enlightenment.
Ah, okay. How so?
Well, Iceland really leaned into this idea of reinventing its Norse origins, using the past to forge a future.
While the Faroes focus more on a vision of a kind of unified Nordic Christianity.
Precisely. And this split becomes really clear in that late 19th, early 20th century period, around 1880 to 1910.
Which was a crucial time for independence movements pushing back against Denmark.
Right. But how they pushed back was different. In Iceland, the push was more against the strict doctrine, the orthodoxy of the Danish church. Their own clergy already spoke Icelandic, which helped.
But in the Faroes.
The opposition was more direct against the church structure itself, the territorial church, because the services were often in Danish, by Danish clergy. It felt more foreign.
Got it. And this ties into building that Nordic identity.
Yeah. The whole 19th century idea of Nordicity used both a kind of Christian ethos and this idea of a shared origin. But Iceland, because of the sagas, they got pegged as the original Viking homeland. It gave their independence claims a powerful historical weight,
So let's follow Iceland's path then. How did modern esotericism fit into that Norse origin idea?
Well, spiritualism in particular offered a way to have a religion that felt uniquely Icelandic. Christian, yes, but not the Danish colonial version. It let them, quite literally, talk to their ancestors.
Conjuring ancestors, yeah. That sounds powerful for nation building.
Extremely. You see, the first spiritualist group in 1904, and that same year, that really symbolic event at Singvellir.
With the medium channeling Oedi.
Yeah, a young medium, apparently dressed like Odi, riding a white horse declaring independence. You can't get much more symbolic. And you had others channeling figures like Snorri Sturluson, the saga writer, through automatic writing.
Wow, so it was deeply tied to their sense of history and identity.
Absolutely. And that's why it never really went away. It found a home, even within the Lutheran Free Church, sort of unofficially. It fit with what the anthropologist Kirsten Hastrup said about Icelanders reproducing the celebrated images of another epoch to invent themselves.
Okay, so Iceland uses its ancient literature, its Viking past, connects it to spiritualism. What about the Faroes? They didn't have the sagas like that.
Exactly. No big ancient literature means it's harder to claim that direct Viking lineage, right? Which maybe meant their path to self-determination felt a bit less legitimate, or at least slower.
So they took the other path, the Christian one.
Yes, the Faroes' identity affirmation really followed that vision of a shared Nordic Christian spirit, influenced by thinkers like Grundtvig in Denmark,
NFS Grundtvig, yeah.
who talked about this inner unity between the spirit of God and the Nordic spirit.
And that influenced the religious groups that sprang up.
It did. Those cultural movements inspired by Grundtvig helped pave the way for groups like the Intermission and the Plymouth Brethren. They focused on building community, emotional conversion, often as a local alternative to the two Danish state church.
Okay, so we have these two different mystical paths emerging. How does the paper compare them at a deeper level? It mentions Troeltsch.
Right. Ernst Troeltsch's idea of mysticism, basically that strong urge for a direct personal religious experience, feeling it, not just hearing about it.
And the paper splits this into two types.
Yeah. You've got Christian mysticism, the collective faith, very community-focused, happening within these sects.
Like in the Faroes.
Exactly. And then spiritualist mysticism, much more individualistic, focused on personal supernatural contact, operating more like a loose network.
Like in Iceland.
Right. And this links directly to how their societies were organized.
Okay, tell me about the Faroes' individualism of conformity. That sounds like a contradiction.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the idea is that these Christian sects, while creating new divisions within villages, actually echo the old way of life in separate independent villages, the Baidir.
Ah, like a village within the village.
Sort of, yeah. A community where your religious ties overlap heavily with family, politics, business. And the conformity part is that everyone's encouraged towards the same type of religious experience, fitting into that collective.
Is there an example of that collective conformity?
The paper points to the traditional whale hunt, the Grindadrop. It takes incredible coordination, everyone has a role, and the catch is shared equally. It reflects these deep communal structures that value conformity and a kind of egalitarian order.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, contrast that with Iceland's individualism of differentiation.
Right. Here, modern esotericism tapped into an existing social pattern. Networking.
Networking, how so?
Well, traditional Icelandic belief already involved this idea of partnership between the living and the dead. And crucially, messages or help from the dead often came through networks of acquaintances, not just family. So communication outside kinship was important.
I see. So spiritualism, with mediums acting as nodes in a network, fit right in.
Exactly. And the differentiation part comes because each individual journey into this, their encounters with spirits, ancestors, spirit guides, it allows for a very unique personal identity to be crafted. Each medium could be quite distinct.
And this reflects a deeper Icelandic trait.
The paper argues yes. It links to this long-term Icelandic value placed on individual autonomy, independence, self-rule. You see it in the sagas with the powerful chieftains, the big men, and maybe even today in how Icelandic society seems comfortable with visible personal success.
So different deep-seated social patterns, community conformity versus individual networking, really influenced which type of mysticism took root.
That's the core argument. The islands weren't blank slates. Their history, yes, but also these underlying social fabrics shaped their spiritual paths.
So studying these literal islands helps us see them as metaphorical islands too, highlighting these distinct developments.
Exactly. It's a heuristic tool, as the paper puts it. It helped understand how conscious choices like aligning with the wing of the Enlightenment interacted with these ingrained long-term social features.
It's a really neat way to connect the historical choices with the sort of deep cultural grammar of each place. And the paper ends by noting this isn't a static picture, right? Things keep changing.
Right. It acknowledges these are ideal types to some extent and points out, you see new kinds of religious entrepreneurs popping up in the Faroes, maybe shifts towards more organization Icelandic esotericism.
Yeah.
The story isn't over.
It's a living history. Really fascinating how these small islands can tell such a big story about culture and religion.
Absolutely.
Like and subscribe to Pulse Fundamentals for more content like this. Sources linked below.